Welcome to Fairfield University's College of Arts and Sciences Dean Series on the future of work. I'm Richard Greenwald, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm joined today with two guests, my colleague Stephanie Gallo, the Director of Career Planning, part of the team at the College of Arts and Sciences Career and Professional Development Office, and Andrew Feigenson, CEO of InfoData at Gallant Capital Company. Andrew's bio is riveting and really interesting. He's a multi-time CEO of several companies that have been at the intersection of data, software, advertising, and marketing technology. And he's specializing in working with these companies to elevate them and to advance them. Prior to InfoData, Andrew teamed up with Bain Capital, launched a leading advertising intelligence company, Vivex, from a combination of business units across various portfolios. Vivex was successfully sold to MediaStar and Thompson Street Capital Partners in 2023. Andrew also partnered with Symphony Technology Group to run leading consumer insights company Simmons, which exited through a merger with GFK, and Fishbowl, a restaurant technology company he navigated through the pandemic. He has a long connection to the university. His mother, Diane, was a longtime professor of English and Judaic Studies at Fairfield University, and he spent many a day, in the fields playing soccer and running around the campus. So we'll talk about his memories. He currently lives in New York City in Forest Hills, home of the original U.S. Open and the Ramones, and he enjoys long-distance running and carpentry. How he finds the time for those things, I am not sure. We've been spending some time in this series thinking about the future of work, particularly as an educational institution training students for launching careers and meaningful lives in the world, getting them to understand what that future might look like, having conversations for the university to learn from those in the field. So really happy to have you here to talk about this. So, one of the things we've been thinking about is technology has been around in various forms for a long time, right? It is always disruptive. There's lots of conversation right now about the level of which technology will replace human labor. Lots of panic about certain jobs going away, certain skill sets going away. We know that if we're looking at past patterns, that there will be some compression of work and some replacement of certain skills, but usually technology leads to additional job creation, additional skills, right? Different careers. Do you think generative AI models are going to change this or keep to the historical pattern?
I believe that the historical pattern stands. And I'd look at it from probably three vectors, a macroeconomic, a microeconomic, and then just societal, right? From a macro perspective, if you were to enter a period where technology truly replaced people and there was less employment, that means there would be less money to spend, right? So if you're Ford or Procter & Gamble, there would be less people to buy your products. That would result less well for the people that own the companies. So on a macro perspective, it's important to keep people employed and doing stuff. From a micro perspective, what happens is technology, to some extent, evens the playing field. And in order to compete, you need to find those new ways to compete on top of the technology. And that's usually where people get involved to create new jobs. That doesn't change. Arguably, I guess you could say AI creates everything and all the new ways of competing, but if it did it, they'd all be creating the same thing. So you're going to have people there. The last one that I feel really, really strong about is, work gives purpose, right? There's a great book by the science fiction author, Adrian Tchaikovsky, called Service Model. I don't know if you ever read this before. And it's a world where, the robots do everything for people and then people have no reasons. They basically start killing themselves. And and you end up with a robot that has a job to please people, but there are no people left, so it doesn't have a job to do. And that's the reality. You think, everything from, Viktor Frankl, kind of man's search for meaning, to just, if people who have been out of work for a while and get, bummed out. We need work. We need work personally. So all those reasons, I don't think the model changes. I mean, AI is going to have a huge impact in a lot of ways, but we'll adjust as a society.
And how do you think it's going to affect, the kinds of industries you've been dealing with, data and information services?
It'll have a big impact. The company I'm at right now, and it's interesting, I'll frame this a little bit, both questions maybe together in this. Informed Data is probably the largest provider of data for background screening. So let's say you're in human resources, you make a new hire, you do a background check on them. We're likely providing data behind that. So we are very firmly knowledge workers, information services. It used to be that the way that data was collected is it was all manual. In some cases, you would send people, in a lot of cases we still do, send people to courthouses to collect criminal records. That data was put online in a web form. And this was one of the first companies that created RPAs or automations using early AI now to go out and collect that data. So in a lot of ways that did replace, people going down to courthouses. And we talk about this openly with the company, that if you're an investor, if you're going to bet on a company and you have one that's doing that kind of stuff and one that's not, you're always going to bet on that company that's becoming more efficient. So it'll change the way it works. But, the flip side of it is, I had a great question from an employee the other day. She said, can I figure out how to automate my job? And if I do, is there work for me in the information technology group? I said, absolutely. Right. If you figure out how to do that and you make everything better, you're going to create a new opportunity. So I think it's a great example of it.
Yeah. And as a follow-up to that, I'm thinking of what are the skills you're looking for right now in terms of that employee, and what do you see companies helping that employee in terms of providing that skill set?
Yeah. I think the first, and I know you've talked about it a lot in different ways in our conversations, is very much critical thinking, creative thinking, right? The world is not changing less fast. It's changing faster than ever before. The intangible skill is people who could look at the way it's changing, understand where it is in a really unbiased way, figure out where the future is going, and really action on that. I know it's a bit of an intangible skill, but that's really important. I think it's a little harder to answer specifically what the tangible skills are, right? I mean, I would have thought, years ago that learning to program was an indelible skill. It turns out AI does that pretty well. So, the fixed skills are a little bit tougher to call right now.
What do you think then is going to be the future of entry-level work? When I think about my first job, I started at NBC Sports and I actually used MRI Simmons. That was my job was to literally pull reports, and it felt like on hours on end. And then, I used that data and I had to come up with stories for brands.
Yeah.
And I imagine now, it's been a long time since I worked in marketing, but pulling those reports may be a little bit more automated. And so if that was my first job, and that's, just in the marketing sector, and it's changed and it's no longer analyzing and interpreting, what do you think the entry-level employee, you mentioned critical thinking. What do you think the future of entry-level work is?
I'll answer that, but it's funny. I didn't realize that you were
yes.
MRI Simmons user.
I was.
We actually, one of the breakthroughs we made there was we took the process of creating the personas, the profiles. We automated that end-to-end. So you probably downloaded into a big spreadsheet.
I sure did.
Right? You sorted by indices, right?
Yes. I got so good at Excel, though.
Yeah. We made that a click of a button.
That's what I figured.
Right. So, but that was I'm going to give you a great example back to what we were talking about. We had a services group whose job was to help people do that. They were scared to death. What happens if you automate this? We're not going to have jobs anymore. And you know what they realized is they could cycle through so many different options. They got better at making an impact and telling a good story, and less about jockeying in Excel.
Yep.
Yeah. Entry level, I think so. Entry level is interesting. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was like you. Like I started off at what's now Accenture. I learned a tremendous amount by walking the halls, meeting the partners, talking to my colleagues on different projects, and that was really important. I think the entry it's going to be less of a hard skill again, but I think in a way what I'm seeing is in a world that's very remote work and heavy. I mean, look, most of the entry level people coming in today, a good chunk of them are going to be partially or fully remote. The ability to learn is tough because we see this like you don't get the network effect.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one piece. I think the other thing is, it's not just how well you do, but it's how you plug in, how much you enjoy what you do at work.
Mm-hmm.
And as an entry level employee who's largely remote these days, creating those connections is very difficult. It's not like the happy hour after work or, in some cases you don't meet people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I find that a lot of my students are really, they want to be in person, and it's interesting because a lot of the companies that I'm finding are doing hybrid. And they are relishing in the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I'm, in my interns, I'm telling them you need to find out what days the meetings are happening so that you can be there and, bump into someone in the hallway and create those mentoring relationships because they are so impactful.
Yeah. So I think that's important, how you create the mentor relationships in that kind of environment. It's a very good concept. Yeah.
As a follow-up to that, talking about AI and technology, I could imagine now there are supervisors who don't have the same level of skill or sophistication with the technology that their employees have. How does that change the power dynamic in the workplace?
It's a good question. The interesting thing about, maybe I think about AI a little bit differently, but, and it depends on your function clearly, but the interesting thing about ChatGPT is it's so accessible. People are using it at all levels. It's not like, I don't know, when, a new technology came out before and you had to figure out a new platform or you just go on, you type it in. It's just so accessible in a lot of ways. I don't know if I see as much as a gap between people in that. I'm sure that it creates different power dynamics elsewhere. I will say, I think it does make everybody's stuff a little bit more replaceable. Like I joked around a bit when I was starting at the role I'm in right now. I asked ChatGPT to create a strategy for it. It was like 50% of what I created as a CEO. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuance on it, but I mean, it wasn't that far off. So, so I think it does mean you have to become a lot better at kind of finding that extra way of creating value around it.
And as a side question, I guess, if you have employees who are using the various chatbots that are out there, do companies have a worry about, feeding the machines, the sort of learning machines, proprietary data or information that gets out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, if you're having people writing marketing content emails, probably less. But when you have a real data asset and you're looking for it to do analysis on there, you don't go to a public model. In that case, you set up private models on things for sure.
Throughout your career, what do you think has been the constant? Meaning, like, you've obviously had a lot of different roles and you've done so much, as the CEO of many companies. What has been the underlying skill set? Is it about problem solving? Is it about taking something that's good and making it excellent? What do you think is your motivator?
So I have a personality defect in that I like the really hard problems. I joke a little bit. I think maybe I was just never good enough to get the really cool jobs, so I'd take the other ones that look bad. But when I look at them, I just see beauty. Like I'll take a company that looks like it's off track, and inevitably, when I look hard enough, there's all these bright spots glittering in it, and I figure out how to make those the things that create the future. When I think, my brother, who's also affiliated with Fairfield, Robert, he jokes with me. He read an article years ago. He said, I figured out the way you think. I said, how? He said, when someone comes to me and say, how do you solve a problem? He said, I think about how to solve it. When they ask you, you ask, is that the problem? Does it need to be solved? Right? And then you figure it out. And I think that's the way I think a lot of the times. When you're reinventing a company, what makes the company great is also when the market changes, what keeps it from being greater. And so there's a process where you have to really reframe the company. And that's just the way I think in a lot of ways. So again, an intangible skill. That said, I do think there are some things that are important on that. I love data. Like even as CEO, I will jump deep into spreadsheets and data to really understand what makes a company tick. It tells you a lot that people don't. I also like listening to people and learning a lot. And that you put the two of those together, and it gives you a bit of a recipe for reinventing.
Yeah, and listening is it's collecting data in just a very different way.
Yeah.
What do you think, if you were to go back in time and describe yourself when you first jumped into your first role, do you think that love of problem solving was there, and it was, maybe or did that really develop over time? Like, what were you like in your first job?
Well, my first job was Accenture, and at the time I was doing a study abroad in Mexico. And I think I forgot how to speak English because when I took the job, I didn't know what I actually signed up for. I thought I was doing management consulting, and I ended up actually learning to code.
Wow.
And I wasn't good at it. I really wasn't good at it. And I was so bad at it, as a matter of fact, I joined a team. It was me and this one woman who was a lot better than me. And the guy who was managing it said, "Look, you don't belong here. You're not doing well." Like, she's going to do all the work. Why don't you try the business team? And I worked out well. By the way, we're married now.
Oh my God, that's incredible. That's incredible.
So it worked out really well. But I think that was it. Once I got to the business team, the first thing I did, this thing called the internet was starting to happen.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time we were working with what's 9X is now back part of AT&T. Verizon. It's not Verizon. And the concept was we built a system that allowed an operator, it sounds super simple now, like instead of sending someone to a house to plug in a telephone, like they could sit at a central computer and turn something on and off. And I said, well, why don't we have people do that on their own by the internet? And I wrote a whole business case after hours on how that should happen. And of course, it ran all the way up the chain. I gave it to the partner, and everyone in between the partner and me was upset that I didn't, go through them to vet this. And of course, they decided the internet would never happen, and it was a stupid idea. It would never be secure enough. So, so I think it's just the way I've thought, and from there, it kind of parlayed into different things.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight, and it made me think about something. So you talked about the critical thinking skills, the inquisitiveness, asking the basic question, is that really a problem that needs to be solved? Which is so much a part of what arts and sciences tries to do. In this, environment we're in right now, and it's been this way for probably 25 years, there is an emphasis on professional education, technical education, and a downgrading of the sort of arts and sciences skills, because you say they're not as tangible. You don't see them the same way that you would coding, right, or some other practice. What would you say to students, current students in high school thinking about college, who might be really interested in humanities courses or a major in history or something like that? What would you say to them when they're thinking about, if I do that, how will I ever get a job?
So my son is 11, and he told me the other day, he said, "Dad, I don't know why they make us study history, social studies." He said, "It's not going to be useful for anything." He said, we should just study like programming and sports. And I said, first I was thinking, well, I don't know about sports. Then I thought, I don't know programming right now. So maybe we go back to social studies and history. No, in all honesty, I think it's the context, right? So we go back to Stephanie running her MRI Simmons analysis, right? And you pull a bunch of data and it's sitting in a spreadsheet. And you know what? You could do a lot of ways to create your segmentations out of that. The really great people saw into the data and they created the segmentations around it. And they could vet that based on what they were seeing in the real world to figure out if it was true or not. And there's something about the perspective you gain when you understand history and you understand society. And I know it's a big premise that way, but that's, I think, what really helps people make a leap along the way.
Yeah, well, I obviously agree with that.
Yeah.
But so now thinking of a college student right?
Yeah.
That student comes to Fairfield and is majoring in their passion area. What skills should they be looking to add? What courses should they be looking at that might be, outside of their comfort level?
If they're starting off look, I'm clearly a big believer in data and understanding how to look at data. And I think it's important because even if you're looking at news and trying to understand like current events, right, from a social sciences perspective, you could read 5 different news sources and it's, you get a much better insight if you can look at the data underneath and make your own decisions on what's going on. So I'm a big believer in becoming adept at data. And I think it gives you the right questions to ask when you read something and you say this, X is correlated to Y, and you say, well, correlation is not causation, so let's get into this and figure out what's going on. I'm a believer in understanding data.
No, I think that's important. The students, in the college in particular are now, in many of the majors are learning how to code in R, learning how to do deeper data analysis and data visualization. And I think that's a very important step for them to sort of elevate their skill set. But I'm also wondering, with the changing nature of technology, right? So R might be replaced by another language. So putting all of your eggs in that basket to learn how to do that is, it's a short-term goal, right? So what are the sort of habits that you think students should cultivate that would be long-term habits that would pay off?
Well, I mean, if I come back to data as an example, I think the programming language is not the underlying question. It's the questions that are the underlying questions, right? And you can get them in a lot of ways. I think ultimately, if you're coding something in R, you're doing some kind of segmentation, some kind of correlation, some kind of differential analysis on things. You're still going to want to do those. Why are you doing it, right? If you understand the reason why you're doing it, you can adapt to the different tools along the way. I know it's tough because when you're entry level, you're going to go in and they're going to ask for very specific skill sets. Right? Do you code Python? Do you code R? And as an entry level person, you don't really have a lot of differentiation, right? You could talk about how you have a big world perspective and all the rest of it, but they really want you to do one function at that time, right? So you have to learn it for the time. But as technology advances, the people who understand those underlying things are the ones that.
So one last follow-up, I guess, of a follow-up of a follow-up. You're coming in as a CEO of a company. You're looking at a new team that you inherit. Right? You're trying to make judgments on sort of, what's working, what's not working, and who are the bright spots in the company. What do you look for in an employee who can shine, right? How do you distinguish the person who's just doing what they're asked to do and those who can think beyond that? How does that demonstrate itself to you?
Yeah, it's a little bit of it kind of shows over time. Let me start out with the opposite. I'm going to start out where I know it's not the right person, right? There's a lot of cases. I'm going
to take lots of notes here.
When you know it's not right is when you see someone who has continuously done the same thing, gotten the same result, which is not necessarily a good thing, and hasn't taken ownership for that. Like, immediately they might be very talented, but the mindset is not going to change, right? Similarly, for what I do, you run into a lot of cases where you have people that are considered indispensable because they have huge amounts of subject matter expertise or, let's say, client relations, right? 99% of the time, those are not really as indispensable as they look. And once you get under the cover, you find a bunch of stuff there that actually could be done a lot better. By the way, I look at myself all the time too. Like, there's no way as good as I do that I'm indispensable, right? So I think that concept. The ones that really shine are the ones that see in what I do, which is these transformations, they see new ways of looking at things and they go get it. Right? They take the accountability, they take the responsibility, and they start making things happen. They do it with low drama, right? They just get it done. So I think that's the way I'd probably look at it. So I look at things in a bit of vector. There's like capability, and if you think about like a grid, there's kind of like capability, and there's the mindset for it, right? You have people who are clearly not capable, not the right mindset. You don't spend a lot of time with them. People who are highly capable, but they don't have the right mindset, you're going to get very minimal out of them, right? People who have the right mindset but aren't capable. Some of them you can train, right? You can train it, and some of them just haven't been pushed. When you open the opportunity, you empower them, you give them the opportunity to train. Some of them rise up, and they are your all-stars. And then clearly anyone who's capable and has the right mindset is already excelling, and you keep them in there. But I think it's that bucket, the mindset with the right, you have the potential, but not the capabilities. You grow them.
And you mentioned, and Stephanie mentioned that many of the first-time jobs that graduates are getting are hybrid.
Yeah.
Right. So to demonstrate that capacity and that mindset, you need to be visible, right? So if you're in the workplace, you can be visible by physically being there and walking around and getting to know people and developing relationships. What advice do you have for folks who are joining a hybrid environment where not everyone is in at the same time? How do they do that? What do you see working in the companies you've been at?
I wish I could say I found a way to make it totally work. And I spent a lot of time with my peers who run companies and investors who run companies. Very few have made like fully remote work a stellar culture. I think we'll get there. But there's a few things. Like one is, when I look, like we've had good, and we're middle-sized companies, small middle-sized companies. We're like 1,000 people. We're not talking like GE level, right? Like 1,000 people, you open up the right kind of Slack channels and you start building communities and interactions in a lot of ways. So, if you're a new employee, like find those channels, right? Find a way to curate some informal conversations. So there's a book I recommend to everyone, by the way, called Never Eat Lunch Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. Talks about networking. I think it's a fantastic book. Adjust that for the world. His whole thing is constantly be trying to give value. And if you reach out to someone in your company and say, hey, can you mind if we have a virtual coffee? A lot of them will say yes to it, right? So I'll build those things. And then the other thing, and this is maybe a little more of a personal preference in a way, is, I tend to be pretty open door in my companies. Yeah, I'm CEO. I'm not that special. Like, whenever great things happens, it happens from people in the companies that are not me. I'm not the most smart person in any company I'm at, right? And so I encourage people to reach out. Not everyone's open to that, and you start figuring out pretty quickly who's reaching out just to reach out and who's reaching out because they're really adding value. If people are really adding value, I'll make time for them every day.
I see a potential workshop here, like helping students navigate the hybrid workspace, because this is a challenge. A lot of students don't know how to operate, and they know. We know how to talk in person, but we don't know how to approach a C-level executive to have a coffee chat. And that's where, if you are doing the work, you should feel confident in that.
Most of us are lost too.
Yeah.
The C-level executives. I mean, culture building so important. You want to retain employees. Like when I get in, usually you have a very low employee satisfaction rating. Yeah. When you're in an office, you can kind of gather people, do some things, right? When you're remote, and you realize that half the people are checked out half the day anyway, like it's hard because in some ways you lose trust. I believe in trust. Like you lose trust in what they're doing. They're not connected into you. And that's something that we got to repair. All of us are struggling with it still. And I've been doing remote work environments for 15 years, right? So it's not new to me.
Yeah. It's
just the degree at which it's happened now is like that.
And I feel like too, the people who have been doing remote work for 15 years, and that might be they might be able to be very functional operating in a remote environment where there's so many students who thrive in that in-person talking, and they've never spent so much time alone thinking or time alone analyzing.
Yeah. I'll add into that. Maybe I'm thinking through it live while we're talking. Something else I'd recommend maybe is you create your own local communities.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we found something similar where some of the younger employees at Vivix, they actually lived all around Manhattan, but they didn't want to go to the office all the time, but they would get together, right?
Yeah.
And that, you had your after work venting, you just weren't in the office beforehand.
Yeah.
Or, I know there's CEO networks like Advantage or something like that. Create your own in your own communities and yeah.
So the happy hours are still happening. It's just not coming from the office. It's going from your.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
And I'm wondering, you've talked about this, coming in as a CEO of a company that is, distressed in some way or not performing up to potential. Part of being successful means develop. You mentioned the word trust. You develop a relationship with individuals. You're trying to find the shininess that's there to raise it up. You know, what do you sort of see as an important culture? So students going out into the workplace are going to wind up in a corporate culture of some kind, right? What should they be looking at in a company to see if it's going to be a positive culture? What can you see from the outside that they can decide between job A and job B?
Yeah, it's so highly differential. Part of it is there's a lot of resources now to understand what a corporate culture is like. You can go to something like Glassdoor, and I argue it's not always right. Usually you get maybe more complaints than you do kudos on it, but there are ways you can go in and find out more about corporate culture. And I think people have their own, it's very personal for what you're looking for. I would look for things that are consistent though, right? Like if you're stepping into something, you should know that you're getting into a culture that you're going to like, and it should stay that way a bit, at least as an entry level. Again, depending on what you want to learn, your level of motivations, I believe that it should offer the right kind of learning and growth for you, even if it's not like learning and development programs, but like it's the right environment for you to learn and grow if you're so inclined to want to do that.
And hopefully the people that you want to stay and retain are the ones who want to learn and grow, right? Like that's kind of one of those intangibles that you mentioned, having a positive attitude, wanting to learn and adapt to whatever the changing landscape might be in the company.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this. The latest stats from Bureau of Labor Statistics show that there's going to be probably 11 or 12 jobs that the college graduate of today will have, and at least 7 careers, some of which don't exist.
Yeah,
right?
I could believe that.
Right.
I could believe that.
So the longevity at a company is not there, right? So if I'm right, folks are looking for that connection, that value at work that will elevate them, right? If they're not growing, they're going, right?
Well, I think that's it's very personal too. When you look at those statistics, one of my best friends coming out of college knew he wanted to be a Wall Street analyst. He became one of the top Wall Street analysts in food. He stayed doing that for decades, and he was phenomenal, financially successful, and the industry was one of the top, had a great personal life. Like, it was great for him. I couldn't do that, right? Like I probably have made less on him over time and been a lot less stable, but I love that challenge of getting into each of these new things. And so I think it's very highly personal. If you get in, you like the consistency, and you probably will stay longer at these places, and you probably want to look at the place itself and wanting to be there. If you like constantly having new challenges, you're going to be getting bored at some point along the way. You look at it that way. And for me personally, I've always looked at it, maybe I say always, I probably did it later in my career retrospectively, but I think if you look at any given job, think about this, you're your own CEO at the end of it, right? And I think you can look at yourself in a sense of an empowerment to say, I want to create my own life. If I'm going to create my own life, then what job I'm in today is just one business in my portfolio, right? And I think that's the right way to look at it. I do think now some of the job hopping I see is just out of dissatisfaction, and I think that's a bad reason to do it. Because if you're going into something, spending a year, and then just being dissatisfied, and you do that a bunch of times, I think it's more on you, and at some point that does catch up to you.
Right. Well, one thing you were saying that you know yourself, and you know what you would be happy doing. So, one of the reasons I think Steph is very successful at what she's doing working with students is she runs them through various sort of assessments to help them understand who they are and what they really value. And I think that's something that's important for students to understand. If they are not going to, do, well being hyper supervised in a very sort of stable, quiet workplace that is going to be very monotonous, then they probably shouldn't go into that company, right? Understanding some of that, right? But it also changes over time, right?
Absolutely, it changes, and part of it changes because you change, the environment changes, and some of it you just realize maybe you didn't know yourself as well as you thought you did, right? I think there's a lot of societal pressures that push you to take certain kind of jobs or do certain types of things, and they're not always the right reason to be looking at them.
Yeah. These students just need to, it's empowering. I'm listening to you, and I'm hearing so many of your talents. I'm like, wow, all these different words are coming in, and I'm like, man, I hope one day our students can, reflect back and say, I did this amazing thing because I was able to dive deep and problem solve. And so, a lot of what we do is really supporting students in understanding what they're good at and how to connect that to an ever-changing workforce.
Yeah, and we do something here, in our honors program and in other contexts where we sort of ask what we see as the enduring questions, right? So whatever that question is, it's a question that we have been asking as a society, as a sort of humankind for a very long time. How it's answered changes with the knowledge base, with the culture, with the times, right? But the question remains constant. One of the things that we want to make sure our students are able to do is have those conversations in a meaningful way beyond the classroom, right? See that as a life skill, right? And you've hinted at that you're looking for those folks who are thinking constantly about these big questions, understanding the times they're living in, the culture, the context, and all of those things. What do you see your teams looking for that demonstrates that spark in an interview, right? Because that's really hard. Students are absolutely nervous. They're worried. They want to know what you want to know because they want to do well on that process.
Well, again, I don't think it's a one size fits all. But certainly what I look for is people that ask good questions of me. And, I think when you look at sales folks for a second, when you look at a great salesperson, they ask before they tell. And I interviewed a guy today for a certain role, senior role. The first thing he said is, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you're looking for, and I'll tailor what I'm talking to. So that's great. Like, I love that, right? But then in the follow-up questions, you really get a sense if they've understood what you're talking about, if they're really considering it or selling themselves to you. And if they're overselling, then you get a little bit nervous. Why are they overselling me, right? So I think being able to ask really astute questions for me is pretty important.
I think one thing you keep talking about too is just authenticity, right? It really depends on the person, and every person is going to bring something different. And if you're telling, if I was to interview, I couldn't say I'm really good at, I'm not great at Excel, but my job isn't to look at data. My job is to help people. And so that's an authentic answer to me. And that's what we hope for with our students and with entry-level workers or whatever level it is that you bring truth, right? And you bring authenticity.
Yeah, so it's funny, like let's face it, as an entry-level person, the likelihood is you don't have a lot of specialty.
No, you have no idea. You have no idea.
You don't know. And I don't know when I'm interviewing because it's, if they've been doing what we were looking for forever, they wouldn't be entry level, right? Mm-hmm. So, but there's something in trust, and when I look at trust, there's the formula for it. And if you've ever seen this before, mm-hmm. It's like credibility plus authenticity, plus accountability mm-hmm. over feeling of self-interest, mm-hmm. right? And so you got to build that, right? So what's the ways I talk about credibility really easily that I can put those points out there? How do I show I'm accountable for something, and then authentically who I am, and how do I show all that is much greater than the self-interest of saying I really want this job right now, which you do want because you're interviewing for it. Yeah. And I think if you nail that, it's probably a good interview. But authenticity is really, really important.
So thinking through your career, looking back on it, and looking forward, there's certain constants that you've relied on, certain a mindset, a certain sense of vision, certain tools, right? What do you see if we were to look 5 years out, right? what do you see as something we all should be striving for, or striving to learn more about?
I would say, I think I'm okay, successful. I'm not the most, not the least. I'm happy with what I've done. I'm proud of it. But I will say any of the success came from failures, right? Everything, and hopefully we all fail. Like if you don't fail at something, it means you haven't pushed the limits enough. I think early in your life, early in your career, it's hard to understand that. Every failure looks like the end of the world, right? I got a bad grade this term. I'm not going to get the right job, right? The right job means I'm not going to be able to support myself. You can just go with it. And what I've learned on that I think hopefully we all take away on it is to really be able to, so in fear comes a lot of time from the unknown. Like if you don't know something, your mind can go into a really fearful place. And if you take that fearful scenario and you say, what would I do in that case? You will have a plan usually. And once you have a plan, you get less scared. And I think that's, I've certainly struggled to figure that out over time. And I think maybe it's not exactly 5 years out. Maybe now today people should be looking at, but I'll make more mistakes in the next 5 years. I know I will. Right.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing for folks in the audience to hear, because we spend so much time sort of hiding from those mistakes, right? We don't admit them. We sort of are embarrassed of them, but that's part of the learning process, right? Everyone has failed, and getting students to understand that you can recover, right? That it's what you do with that stumble that's important. And I would also argue, anytime that folks have failed and picked themselves up, they have a good network of people around them,
yes,
that are there to support them, right? I'm sure, that happened with you. Family and friends were able to sort of, help you develop, and learn from that. I know I've had that as well, right? And so it's important that students cultivate those relationships, right? Because the same folks that are helping them now might be helping them 10 years from now.
And if I go down that route for a second, and I encourage everyone to make sure they're figuring out every week, I have a day every week I try to figure out how do I help someone else? Because inevitably there's somebody that needs their help at the moment. They're going to help them out. And don't go into it thinking you're going to get something back. Maybe karmically you will. Maybe you will at some point along the way. But ultimately that it does come back around.
You sure you didn't go to a Jesuit university?
I was just thinking, I was like, that is.
My mom taught it.
I know. So it's obviously connected. So, and I know we're running out of time.
There's Fairfield in my bones.
Yes.
There is. Yes. As we end, I want to know what books, podcasts, magazines, or information students should be looking, or any of us should be looking to. You already mentioned, one book, Never Eat Lunch Alone, right? Anything else come to mind?
Yeah, a few. I think one thinker author that was formative for me was Clayton Christensen. He wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. When I think about most of what I do, turning around companies, so much of it is based on the innovator's dilemma, directly or indirectly. It became a bit of an ethos for me. And one of his books that I love, by the way, which was not like business academic, it was called How Will You Measure Your Life? Which, I guess for the people on the podcast who haven't heard about it, it's, he goes back to his business school reunion, sees all the successful people. On a business perspective, some of them are not so successful in their personal lives. And he asked, did they have a strategy? They had a strategy for their business life and not for their personal life. And business is kind of easy. It's like, am I getting paid more? Am I getting promoted? You can measure your success. When you have kids, it's harder. On any given day, you may feel more or less successful, right? So I think that's another one. And then, just for podcasts, I just love things that tell stories, like where you can learn from people who've gone before you. So back to your question on history, like learn as much as you can from people who went before you. One of them is Acquired, which, charts the history. And I'm blanking on the other one now. This is a guy who reads biographies and summarizes the biographies. I'll get back to you with the name on it, but it's great. Something about leaders, and you learn from all. And that's his whole hypothesis is like all these people have gone before you. Why don't you try to walk in their footsteps first to learn what they've done? And in today's world, you have such a tremendous ability to do that.
So thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, Stephanie, for being part of the series, and thank you for being listeners.